So I was finishing an article about a corruption scandal here in Spain last January. Corruption was big in the press at the time. And I couldn't quite finish it. I couldn't leave my readers with anything more than, "Your country's corrupt. Tough luck." It seemed wrong. Don't you find it frustrating to hear about a problem you can't do anything about? Do you ever find yourself feeling overwhelmed after reading the newspaper? Okay, who here has yelled at the television? Come on, be honest. Yeah. I'm an activist, which is better than therapy, because when I hear about all the terrible things happening in the world, I take heart in the fact that at least I'm doing something to be part of the solution. I'm also a journalist. And today, I'd like to talk to you about something the press should do, but generally doesn't. Mostly because of deeply ingrained ideas about what journalism is and isn't. I'm going to put forth an argument for what I call journalism for action, which is when the press not only reports the news story, but tells us what we can do about it. This idea requires a rethink of our basic ideas about journalism. So I'm going to start at the very beginning. First, democracy is good. I think we can all agree on this. In fact, all but 4 of the world's countries claim to be democratic. Now, that's not to say they are, but it shows that this is a widely shared value. Second, citizen participation is at the heart of democracy. Literally, democracy means ruled by the people. Now, our most basic form of participation is the vote. And this provides a check on our politicians. Because what do politicians want? They want to get reelected. Right? But it doesn't end there. We have a wide array of ways that we can participate in our democracies. Writing a letter to the editor, volunteering for a nonprofit organization, organizing a TEDx event, running for office. It's critical that we participate in our democracies because when we don't, it makes it easier for big money interests, and by that I mean corporations and wealthy individuals, to exert their power over our government in ways that is not necessarily in the interests of society as a whole. According to the Sunlight Foundation, 28% of all registered political donations in the United States in 2012 came from just 31,000 people. That's 1% of the 1% of all US citizens. Not one member of the US House of Representatives or the Senate got there without financing from this exclusive group. Just to give you an idea how exclusive this group is, take a look at their annual donation. Their average donation in 2012 was $26,500. Who can afford to give away that kind of money? Certainly not the average American. That represents more than half the median annual income of the average American family. Now, don't be fooled into thinking that this doesn't happen here in Spain, in Europe. It's just less transparent. And this isn't to say that citizen action isn't a force in democracy. The French Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, the Women's Movement. Here in Spain, doctors right now are out fighting for health care, and teachers are fighting for education, and they're making a difference. But it's more complicated. Citizen groups have to compete with the big money interests, and the only way they can do that is through numbers, which is precisely the idea behind grassroots organizing. We take one tiny little blade of grass that on its own is pretty tiny and insignificant, but you bring it together with hundreds, perhaps thousands of others, and we get a big, beautiful lawn that's impossible to ignore. Democracy belongs in the hands of all the people, not just the privileged few. And the press can play a role in this by connecting citizens to civic participation. Which brings me to my third point. In order to be active, participating citizens, we must be informed. Sure, we can and should seek out opportunities for civic participation on our own. And civic organizations should reach out to us. But that doesn't get the press off the hook. The press is our main source of information. They're also our facilitators of dialogue and debate. We call the press the fourth estate of our government. And this is because the press is the institution that connects us to our government and provides an important check on their power. We rely on the press to tell us what the government's doing so we can throw the bums out in the next election if we have to. But I believe the press should inform us in a much more complete sense. They should not only tell us what the government's doing, but what we, as concerned citizens, can do on any side of a given issue. Journalism for Action requires a rethink of our basic assumptions about journalism. And I want to be very clear about what Journalism for Action isn't. Journalism for Action isn't biased journalism. My little brother once accused me of being a biased journalist. We love each other dearly, but we scream at each other about politics. So he didn't like an article I wrote, and he lobbed the dreaded bias accusation at me. The trouble is that while we're concerned with this left-right bias, what we're missing is the true bias of the media, which is institutional. The press is biased towards institutions such as government, corporations. Now, in Journalism for Action, we're able to cover and offer opportunities for participation on any side of a given issue. And if you want unbiased journalism, you're going to have to read news from a variety of sources, from different countries, and throw some independent journalism into the mix. Next, Journalism for Action isn't activist journalism. Activist journalism is when a news organization promotes a very specific political agenda. We know who they are, and we follow them to have our views confirmed, not challenged. Right? Journalism for Action can provide opportunities to participate on any side of a political issue, not just one. I took this photo with a donkey, not just because he's very cute, but because it's the symbol of the Democratic Party. And during the 5 years I represented Democrats abroad here in Spain, I spent a lot of time talking to the media. They were very interested in our party positions and, of course, our politicians. But they were not interested at all in my message, which was how Americans could vote from abroad. Sure, if I was in live television, I could just ram that message in, but not a chance in print. This begs the question, why would the press be against informing citizens? Finally, Journalism for Action isn't a new idea. I'm just pointing out a concept and putting a name on it. In fact, there are already some journalists and news organizations that are practicing Journalism for Action. My favorite example is Democracy Now! They'll often mention the name of an organization in their broadcast and put links in their website. New York Times journalist Nicholas Kristof has told us some of the most heartbreaking stories from the developing world. In an interview with Fast Company, he tells us, "One of the biggest complaints readers have about my work is that I don't tell them often enough what they can do. I think this is an area where journalism sometimes falls short." Kristof sometimes mentions the name of an organization working on an issue he's writing about. And this elicits a huge response. In fact, so much that he's been kind of taken aback. And in the same interview, he talks about this. He says, "It makes me a little bit nervous because it's not what we, as journalists, have traditionally done. But again, it responds to a real desire on the part of the reader to do more than just read the article, but to get involved." Journalism for Action requires a rethink by both the press and the citizens of our basic assumptions about journalism. We live in a world with some very serious challenges: crushing economic inequalities, looming threats to the environment and our health, wars, Some people think the answer is more government. Some people think the answer is less government. I think that the only way we can confront these challenges as a whole society is through more citizen participation. And the only way we can do that is if the press not only informs us about the news, but tells us what we can do. We need to rethink our ideas about journalism by focusing on its role in democracy, informing the people so that they can be active, self-governing citizens. Well, you might be wondering what I did with that article. I told my readers that the answer to widespread corruption isn't to curl up in the fetal position, but to see it as a call to action. That the only way we can combat corruption is through citizens who are organized and know how to advocate in their own interest. I invited my readers to a series of workshops on grassroots organizing here in Madrid, and the response was overwhelming. Here are the 50 people who turned out one Saturday morning for the very first conference, and it was a beautiful day, and instead they spent it indoors with me learning about organizing. So what can you do? First, next time you find yourself shaking your head at the newspaper or yelling at the television, I want you to contact that journalist and ask them what you can do. If you come across an example of journalism for action, I want you to thank them. And then I want you to answer their call to action. Journalism for action both serves and depends on you. We've got a lot of work to do. Let's get going. Thank you.